Well, welcome back to the Tower of Babel has free Wi-Fi, and this is the second to last session, session 9. As we've just thought about all the things that we've talked about over the last 8 weeks and thinking through some recommendations or suggestions and things that we do in our personal lives that we think or we hope are wise ways to interact with and use technology. So what we're not trying to do today is lay out for you like the laws of how Christians ought to use their cell phones or whatever else, or the internet or things like that. The reason being is that each of us are in slightly different contexts. For every one of these things we're going to talk about, there's reasons why not to do it. We're just putting these things forward as just ideas of things that we do or try to do, and some of them I think will work well for you. Some of them will be challenging. So I asked all of you to kind of perform a personal tech audit and kind of think through your day. Hopefully most of you did that. I think it's useful to do. If you haven't, there's still time, so you can do that after watching this session. Pastor Clayton, I just wanted to put the question to you first, that as you kind of did that for yourself, did you have any reflections about that, or was there anything kind of surprising when you kind of sat down to think about it, or that was thought-provoking?
So I realized that as far as leisure, almost everything I do aside from reading has to do with a screen. Mm-hmm. There are exceptions. I like to hike. Mm-hmm. I like to go out for a walk or whatever. But the majority of the time, especially we're just coming off of the cold months when being outside was not possible. But just looking back, I feel like part of this is the quarantine, but part of it isn't. Nearly every leisure activity had to do with a screen. Even a lot of my work day has to do with a screen. And the thing I really wrestled with was I have a computer app called Logos that is a Bible software. Mm-hmm. That is what I do my devotions on every day. And just wrestling, there's advantages to that. I can highlight, I can make notes in a way that you just can't with a paper Bible. I can search, I can do all those things in a way that I can't. And wrestling with, is that good, given how prevalent screens are? I haven't done devotions with a paper Bible in a very long time. And just thinking about how permeated my life is.
Yeah, I think I thought about that too, especially with the leisure piece. So one of the things I do is I write, creatively, I write books. And that is almost exclusively done on my laptop. And I have pads of paper that I'll make notes on and things. Or sometimes I'll use a whiteboard, to kind of chart out ideas and things like that. But yeah, definitely with the leisure piece, that my creative writing is done with my computer. Watching TV is done with devices. Better than I used to be, but I like to play games on my phone, and so that's obviously happening on my phone. And yeah, I think right now, especially with the quarantine, and I think it's getting easier since we're getting into nicer weather now, that hopefully this will kind of shift around. But yeah, it's I'll go home and I'll spend some time writing, I'll watch some TV. I've bought some old video game systems to play old video games from my childhood. All technology, all screens. And usually at some point in the evening, I try and take a break and go read for 45 minutes or so. But the rest of it is just it's all screens.
One of the other things that I thought about with my personal tech audit was that even if I'm not doing something that has visual input, even if I'm outside, almost always doing something with auditory input. So I spent for 2 days earlier in the week. Each day I was out in my yard for about 3 hours. It was great. And that entire time, I had my earbuds in and was listening to podcasts or an audiobook. I had not realized how heavily personal use of technology had permeated my life until you made me do this audit.
First thing we kind of talked about is tech baptism. And what I mean, I think I meant that, in my mind, I kind of meant that in two senses. That there is the ritualized entrance of technology into somebody's life for the very first time, so tech and babies, which I'll say more about in a minute, and then kind of your daily entrance into technology, it's your first interaction with tech throughout the day. And I'm not a parent, neither of us are parents, and so I don't say any of this. Again, this is suggestions and recommendations, right? None of this isn't judgment or condemnation, but hopefully it is obvious, and if it's not, go back and watch some session 3 especially, that the toll that screens and digital technology take on developing brains as a whole is very high, and the danger and risk posed to especially infants and toddlers and young children using these devices is very grave. I personally, and I may be proved wrong, but one of my personal suspicions is that when I'm an old man, the fact that we let babies do things with touch screens is going to be like when we look back and ask people how they could smoke while they were pregnant, right? And they're going to go, well, we didn't know how bad it was, right? That's what people say about smoking now. And I think we're going to say that about screens, like we didn't know how bad it was and what it was doing to brains that were still forming. I would just make a personal plea that if you have children or if you have grandchildren, do whatever you can to keep digital technology away from them for as long as you possibly can. And I would also say the longer you can wait to give your older child a smartphone, the better. I think every year, they talk about how children are beginning to get exposed to pornography at younger and younger ages, right? And we think, well, how is that happening? Well, it's because these 7-year-olds have iPhones. That's how it's happening. Yeah, I just want to put that out there as to try and keep digital technology away from babies and toddlers for as long as you possibly can. Keep cell phones, smartphones away from your kids for as long as you possibly can. And even if they've already been exposed, like it's not too late to start trying to build in habits of limited screen time with them. So we can kind of move maybe to talking about our kind of daily tech baptism, so like our entrance into our relationship with technology. One of the practices that I have adopted for at least since I've been home from China, so since the last 3 years, is that I bought an alarm clock, so I do not use my phone to wake myself up because I am committed to my smartphone not being the first thing that I look at in the day. The reason why I do that is because I think that often what will happen is, so I'm checking it to see who's texted me. A friend overseas is usually the only person that I'll have messages from, but that's the primary reason, right, is I'm checking to see has anybody called. I think, it's my role as a pastor, right? Somebody go to the hospital in the middle of the night, just kind of wanting to check on those things. But I think that if I had my phone there in bed and checked those messages, I would not then put it down and proceed with my morning, right? Because there's a whole smorgasbord of things to check.
What do you do when you sit down to poop? Do you use your phone then?
No, I read.
Good for you.
Yeah, so...
No. Do not include that.
Why?
In the video. No.
That's an important... Because that's a ritualized habit. It's a ritualized habit.
Then let me reword it. Let me reword it then.
Fine.
So what do you do when you sit down to go to the bathroom?
I read. I have several physical magazine subscriptions, and so I read my magazines while I'm conducting business.
I just recently made a switch back to having my phone with me in bed, and not because I want to be able to check it. In fact, I'm intentional about not checking it. It is plugged in out of reach. The idea during quarantine of people having issues or emergencies, I've wanted to be available. And so what I've tried to do is go through my first morning ritual, dealing with the dogs, all those things, without my cell phone. And that's been good, but usually, especially when I sit down for breakfast, that's when I check through things.
Like we've talked about, there's always a trade-off with tech, and then there's also a trade-off for not using it. So obviously, smartphones grant us greater connectivity and reachability. Again, I think as a pastor, and I think it would be different if I were a senior pastor, because I think just by default, you're generally going to get, we just took so-and-so to the hospital at 1 o'clock in the morning. And so I think if and when my role changes, I think I'll have to redo the calculation on that. But it's like I have decided, if somebody calls me and let one of the youth text me in the middle of the night, I'm not going to see it until the morning. I think that for me, it's part of that calculation is I'm not God. I'm not the vital ingredient, and I'm not saying, and again, I'm not saying anybody else thinks this. I'm just saying, as I've reflected on myself, I think that with the onset of 100% reachability, now everyone expects everyone to, and it's no, actually, I refuse to always be reached, and y'all just have to deal with it.
I remember before cell phones, you just did not assume you could always reach people. And I think there's something healthy to that we've lost.
Patience. The cultivation
one
of
of them.
patience.
The recognition-
the baseline.
The recognition that not everything is urgent.
Yeah. So the next thing is kind of the prayer habits of technology, and again, kind of thinking about that in two senses. One is our ritualized habits of checking our phones, and then also kind of how technology impacts and interacts with our faith. And so just a few ideas here for checking your phone. And I noticed, well, I have two thoughts about this, but I mentioned a few times that for Lent, one of the things I gave up was the internet on my phone and then also games on my phone. And the number of times, and the idea was that every time I pull my cell phone out to Google something, I would pray. And for the first couple weeks, right, I was pulling out my phone a lot and spent time in prayer, but then I got used to it and that kind of dwindled, which I think was okay. But then I've also noticed that my eyes are very sensitive, that like if I have my phone out, like on my desk or something like that, I have to turn it so that its back is up, because any shifting of light on the screen of my phone, my head darts over there. It's like, huh? What was that? It was just a bird passing, over the window or something like that. Not even just my phone. So a few weeks ago, I was sitting there and I had a book that I guess the cover was just glossy enough that as the reflection shifted, my eyes would dart to it, thinking that I got a notification. And I don't like that. I don't think that that's good. We're talking about formation, right? And how are these things forming us? And if nothing else, our phones are forming us to be distracted and unable to focus on the task at hand. So just a few ideas and things that I do. Probably close to 90% of the day, my phone is on silent, and it won't even vibrate. So silent, no vibration. So I have to go look to see if I've missed calls, because I've also turned off, if you have an iPhone, the little red circle things that appear on your apps are called badge notifications. So those are all off on my apps, or almost all of those badge notifications are turned off, so that I'm not distracted by them. The one app, there's two apps that those are not on for. The App Store app to tell me that it's time to update things. That will still give me badge notifications. And then a messaging app called WhatsApp. Those badges are still turned on because my overseas friends use those. Well, then I also want to talk a bit about like tech and church, or tech and devotions. And so I would advise you, not you specifically, but us, to try and make your devotions as analog as possible. And using Logos on your computer, I think, is a little different. Like I would be very firmly in the no camp if what your devotions are is a Bible app on your cell phone. Here's why. It's because your physical Bible cannot distract you in the way that your smartphone can. Especially if all of your notifications are still on, you've lost before you've even begun the battle of focus, and to try and actually meditate on the Word of God. Now, I think the Bible apps have really great uses. I think that in a pinch, of course, I think that if you're in a stage of life where you cannot sit for half an hour, and pray and read your Bible, and I think things like that can work. If you have to do it while you're at work, this is a realm of wisdom, not a realm of law. And so I'm not telling you that you can never use a cell phone or a device for your devotions, but I think that as you're able to use a physical Bible, to use a physical journal, I would also say that at church, and of course we're not meeting as a church right now, but one grand day when we're able to start physically meeting together again, I think also just to recommend that you really try to either bring your Bible or use the ones that we provide and not be on your phone during service for the same reasons, right? Sure, you can Google what is the context of this or what does that Greek word mean, but you can also Google different recipes. You can look up menu of a restaurant you want to eat at lunch. You can text your friend. You can do a billion other things and actually be present in what's happening right now. And I think that if nothing else, the spiritual disciplines of the Christian faith are meant to help you be present to what's happening right now. And so when we use technology that robs us of that, we are moving away from, the goal of presence, our own presence. Because here's a secret. If you can't be present to yourself, I find it very hard to believe that you can be present to God and to be aware of His presence around you if you yourself are not even actually in the presence of the current moment.
One of the real damaging things about having a cell phone, for example, in church, is that we develop this reflex that in the moment of boredom, we go to our smartphone, whether we're standing in line at the pharmacy, whatever.
Yep.
And if you're in church, a lot of the times what you'll find is growth, development, becoming better at something, gaining understanding at something, involves periods of boredom. The greater problem is if every time I'm bored, I check my phone, my attention span and capacity to go without being bored will shorten and shorten and shorten. But if you actually take that option away from yourself and refuse to check your phone, say, during church, I think that what you'll find is that the Holy Spirit has an opportunity to have a more powerful formation of your heart during that time. You'll find that you're more likely to encounter God during those times.
Like, I think it's just noticing. I think that one of the things that, like, prayer and meditation on the Word, one of the ways that it changes our brain in a good way is that I think it helps us be more observant. I think there's a host of reasons why that inclines us more to the presence of God and to what He's doing. Because then you notice what people are doing, you notice what they say, you notice what they care about, you notice beauty in the little things. If your face is glued to your phone all the time, you won't see the little wildflowers, next to the sidewalk. Again, just the billion little things that testify to, the goodness of the Creator and the presence of God in our midst. As we talked about last week, digital is meant to inform, analog, real things transform. And so watching a nature video on your phone is not transformational in the same way as just sitting and looking at your own yard for 5 minutes. So we can move on to kind of the habits of tech communion, and just a few ideas here, mostly with just and kind of working with the same themes of being present with people, being present with ourselves, and these ideas of embodiment. And we talked a lot about that last week, of the idea of like excarnation, and how the worldview of modern digital technology is wanting us to move our lives more and more into just the space of our heads. And even our faith or our religion, right, is sometimes thought of as only something that occurs in your mind and that your body doesn't have anything to do with it. And that those things are very wrong. God would not have come in a body if bodies were not very important to what was happening in the world and in the universe. So a few things here. Something I try and follow is I always try to prioritize the person or people that are actually sitting in front of me rather than the people on my phone. And there's a few concrete ways to do this. One is that when you're having a meeting or sharing a meal with someone, do not put your phone on the table. And so there are studies that have clearly demonstrated that the moment a device is sitting in view of the people, their level of focus immediately drops. And so don't put it on the table. Something that I try and do is just leave it in another room. I kind of think of my kitchen as the phone room. And I'm not perfect. Again, it's a wisdom thing. It's not a rule thing. But like when I walk in the house, I try and lay my phone on the kitchen table and then leave it there. If I need it, I'll come back in and get it. And I've actually been a little pleased with myself. There was a few times in the last week or two where I've just forgotten where it is. And I had to walk around my house being like, where did I leave my phone? And I was actually encouraged by that, because it's like, I literally forgot where it was for hours. I mean, like, where did I leave my smartphone?
I have been guilty at the Blend or something else of putting my phone face down on the table, because I want to be able to, if I receive multiple texts, I want to be able to check it, just to make sure that there's not, something that I urgently need to respond to, but I don't reply. I think that what I've become convicted of here is that it doesn't need to be on the table. Like, I didn't really think about how just having it on the table changes the atmosphere. I do think it's good if you're a married person to be available to your spouse, right? The worst habit, and I think this is what you're getting at here, and you'll see this happen at restaurants, at the Blend, is a person is with another person, receives a text, and immediately picks up their phone and stops the conversation to be able to interact or reply. And on one hand, you may feel like what that is responsible use of a phone because you're being easy to reach, but it's actually irresponsible use of company.
Yeah. I think as an extension with that, especially with your family, that I would encourage you to maybe make a rule, if it's your house, that phones don't make it to the dinner table. And you've seen this chain reaction in your life many times. All it takes is one person to take out their phone, and then everybody else usually does it. Because it's almost like it's a ritual of intermission, right? And it's a signal that we have reached an intermission in the conversation, so everybody can take out their phones and check it. Cut that circuit in half, my friends, and don't let phones make it to the dinner table. Leave them in another room. The world will be fine for 45 minutes until you go check on it again. We're not God, and we don't need to try and be omniscient. Try to spend twice as much time in embodied activities as you do in front of screens. In a day. And so what I mean by embodied activities would be things you do with your body. So hiking, yard work, cleaning your house, cooking things, playing with pets and or children. And so like for instance, generally right now I spend about 2 hours, at least on my phone tells me my daily screen time is about 2 hours. So that would mean that I would aim to spend 4 hours doing other things that don't involve screens. Like I said, right now a lot of my leisure involves screens. So that's there's a big gap between that. But I think that is a good thing to strive for, not a law to feel crushed by if you get to the end of the day and realize, you didn't do it. But I think tech confession, I think it's good, especially if some of us don't really struggle with this. You may have a smartphone, but you're not spending 2, 3, 4 hours a day on it. But I think that for those of us who do, it's good to include screen time and tech use in kind of the realm of accountability. So Pastor Clayton talked about that in his sermon this past Sunday, that all of us need, and the practice is going to look different again depending on your life stage and your context, but we all need a friend or a few friends who are able to speak not just forgiveness over us in the midst of our struggles with sin, but also the truth. And I think a question attached to that is there someone in your life who you have given permission to speak into what you post on social media? And I think that's a very key question, because for many of us, our ritualized use of social media is as a method of sovereign expression, meaning that we could say whatever we want, having someone who you have given permission to say, hey, if I post something and you don't think it's appropriate, tell me. Then I would also say, and I mentioned a few times, that I fasted from games and the internet on my phone for Lent, and I think that Lent is a great time to give up certain aspects of your tech use, just because it's an established kind of time of fasting in the life of the church. 6 weeks is enough time to break the cycle of a habit, I think, right? Isn't it usually? Yeah, it's double, I guess, because isn't it 3 weeks is usually, so it's double the time that it takes. So it's plenty of time, especially if you fail a little bit, to actually disrupt that chain. And I found with myself, maybe not with the games, although I'm still trying not to pull my phone out when I'm watching TV, but Googling things has not bounced back to what it was before this past Lent for me, and I'm glad for that. There are definitely times where it would be appropriate for us to actually cut out something and never go back to it again. Tech addiction exists, and we talked about that in previous sessions. But I think that generally it's going to more need fasting from something for a set amount of time is going to maybe be the wiser course of action. Tech and relationships. So just a few things here is that I would really encourage you, and I know most of the younger people at Calvary are not watching these Sunday schools, which that's too bad. But again, you have kids, you have grandkids. As it comes up in conversation, I would just very much encourage you to encourage them to not have important interactions over text or email. To try and call somebody, in our current time, you can't really necessarily meet with them face to face, but to do as much important communication as possible with your voice and not with over text messages. We're all familiar with situations where somebody's nuance did not make it over text, and we thought they were mad at us when they weren't. A quick example of this is that people that are older than me will often use periods to punctuate their text messages. And for my generation and for those younger than us, if you send a text with a period at the end of it, you're mad. That's the connotation, is that you're sending it passive aggressively, you're sending it angrily. And so, many times when people who are 15 or 20 years older than me have sent a text with a period on it, oh no, I made them upset. They weren't upset, they just were using proper grammar and punctuation in their text.
I don't want to name any names or call Lori Kinsinger out, but it's really a good idea not to use too many periods in your text messages.
Lori was also the one that I was thinking of with her. Well, because when I am mad, I send text with periods. That's how I convey my anger. All of that to say, when it comes to important conversations, try and have them face-to-face is obviously the best, because a lot of our communication happens with our bodies. We can't read that when it's a phone call, but obviously a phone call is preferable over text. I think in all of these conversations, the question really that each of us has to continually be asking is, does my use of this technology honor the Lord? Sometimes our friends can kind of help us think through that, but oftentimes I think we have to just examine our own hearts and kind of make that decision hopefully, prayerfully, right? And to kind of bring those things to the Lord, and have Him kind of help us sort through, what is good and what is not. And maybe my concluding thought for this session would be just that the less that we can use technology, I think ultimately the better. The more thoughtfully, the more intentionally we can use technology. Really just the worst way to go about the day is to just thoughtlessly be on our phones, thoughtlessly surfing the internet, thoughtlessly watching TV or watching YouTube videos, or scrolling through Instagram or Pinterest or whatever else, and just never actually stop and think about what am I doing, and what do I want to be doing? And how should I be spending this time? So next week will be our final session. That's really just going to be a wrap up. And so it won't be anything new. I think it'll just be Clayton and I's kind of final thoughts. And we will see you next week.